I started the washing machine and saw a pair of lace panties, size XS. My husband said, "They're yours." They just shrank. My size is L. I pretended to believe him and, "I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled." I used to think my life was predictable in the safest, most ordinary way. At 60, predictability had become a kind of comfort for me. My days followed a rhythm so steady it felt like background music. Soft, familiar, nothing to question. I woke early, made my coffee the same way every morning, walked our dog down Maplewood Lane, and returned to the house that had held 26 years of marriage with Daniel. And for a long time, I believed we were fine. Or maybe I simply wanted to believe it. Daniel had changed, though I hadn't allowed myself to see the pattern at first. He'd become distracted, easily irritated, quick to retreat behind the glow of his phone. He'd started staying late at his job at the insurance office. "End of quarter," he'd say. "Numbers are a mess." And of course I believed him. Why wouldn't I? After all these years, wasn't trust supposed to be second nature? But then there were the smaller things. Things most women my age would immediately recognize as warning signs. Only I didn't, not yet. A faint smell of perfume clinging to his shirt that wasn't mine. Sudden showers the moment he got home. Laundry he insisted on doing himself. A quietness between us that felt less like peace and more like the absence of something that used to live there. How long had I been ignoring it? One afternoon, after he'd rushed off again, another budget meeting, I sat alone in the dining room with a cup of lukewarm tea. The chair across from me was empty. His napkin sat untouched from breakfast. I stared at the pale fabric and felt a strange tug in my chest, something like premonition or maybe grief. Was this what love turned into? Two people living side by side, performing the routines of marriage without its substance? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. The next morning, the incident happened, though at the time I didn't realize it would change everything. I was downstairs in the laundry room, the one Daniel rarely entered unless he needed a clean shirt right away. The machine had just finished spinning. When I opened the door, a small piece of fabric tumbled forward onto the tile floor. Lacy, black, delicate. Not mine. I froze. My fingers hovered just an inch above them before I finally picked them up. They were light as air and tiny, XS printed right on the inside of the waistband. XS, I wore L. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the item like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. My heart didn't race. Instead, it slowed, then dropped somewhere deep inside my chest. Nothing in my life had prepared me for that moment. Nothing in all my books, my conversations with friends, my years of marriage had ever taught me how to respond when betrayal arrived quietly in a laundry basket. When Daniel came home that afternoon, I waited until he stepped into our bedroom to change. I walked in after him and held up the underwear. "Daniel," I said calmly, "what is this?" He barely glanced at them. "Those, they're yours." I laughed, an incredulous, stunned sound. "Mine? Daniel, they must have shrunk in the wash," he interrupted, already turning away, already dismissing me. "You've been washing on high heat. Things shrink." Shrink? L to XS? Did he really expect me to swallow that? But I didn't argue. I didn't push. Something inside me told me not to, not yet. I nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right." He seemed relieved that I didn't press further. Too relieved. That night, while he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling. The shadows moved across the room with the headlights passing outside. It felt like the whole house was shifting, settling into a shape I didn't recognize. Every breath he took sounded like a reminder that I didn't know the man lying next to me as well as I'd thought. If those underwear weren't mine, then whose were they? And why were they in our laundry? The next day didn't bring clarity, only more questions. Daniel left the house early, claiming he had to meet a client across town. I watched from the kitchen window as he backed out of the driveway. He didn't wave. He used to always wave. After he left, I went upstairs to our bedroom. The sunlight streamed across the bed in long yellow bars. Everything looked normal. Too normal, like a stage set before actors arrive. I opened his nightstand drawer, something I never used to do. I wasn't searching for anything specific. I simply needed to feel grounded. Inside were his reading glasses, an old watch, and strangely, a receipt from a cafe I'd never heard of. 2 iced lattes, a date from last week, paid with his card. For years, he never drank iced anything. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the receipt between my fingers. Should I ignore this? Pretend the underwear had been a mix-up? Pretend the iced lattes were just a quick coffee run? But could a marriage survive on pretending? I didn't speak to anyone that day. Didn't call a friend. Didn't confront him when he came home in the evening smelling faintly of citrus shampoo. Another new smell. Instead, I watched him closely, quietly, while he talked about traffic and meetings and a coworker who ate his yogurt by mistake. His words slid past me like water. I was listening to everything else. The pauses, the tension in his shoulders, the way he kept his phone face down. That night, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't frightened of the truth. I was frightened of how long I had been refusing to see it. And somewhere inside me, behind the ache, behind the quiet panic, a seed of cold, steady resolve began to take root. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would start paying attention, really paying attention, because whatever Daniel was hiding, I was finally ready to know. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Daniel was still asleep, turned to the far edge of the bed, his back curved away from me. It struck me suddenly how long it had been since we'd slept facing each other. How many nights had passed like this without my noticing? I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. The house was still and dim, the air cool with the early hour. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, staring at the steam rising from the mug. My hands trembled slightly. I wasn't ready to speak to anyone yet. I wasn't ready to confront him. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Not after the underwear, not after the receipt, not after the perfume, the showers, the lies he told with a straight face. So what was I supposed to do? I sat at the dining table with my notebook, the old leather one Daniel had given me years ago. I opened it to a blank page and wrote a single word in the center: loss. What would I lose if my suspicions were true? What would a divorce mean for someone my age? Could I afford to live alone? Would I keep the house? Would I even want it? The questions felt endless, heavy. We had built this life together. Mortgages, savings, retirement accounts. Unraveling that would be like pulling threads from an old sweater until the whole thing collapsed. At my age, starting over wasn't romantic. It was frightening. But living with a lie, wasn't that worse? I took another sip of coffee and tried to breathe. I remembered something my mother used to say when I was a girl. When you can't trust the surface, check the foundation. Maybe it was time to do just that, quietly, carefully. I turned the page and wrote a second word: plan. Not a dramatic one, not something reckless or emotional. A simple, steady plan built on observation and information. Step 1, watch. Step 2, gather facts. Step 3, do not let him know. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about anger. It was about clarity. When Daniel finally came downstairs, I pretended nothing was wrong. I greeted him with a soft, "Good morning," poured him coffee, kissed his cheek. His smile looked almost relieved, like he believed the previous day had simply blown over. Did he think so little of me? Or had I trained him to believe I would always forgive? He left for work after a rushed breakfast. I waited for the sound of the garage door closing and his car pulling away before I stood from my chair. I had work to do. First, I walked through the house with new eyes. The bedroom, the bathroom, the laundry room. I wasn't searching for dramatic evidence. That only happens in movies. Real life leaves smaller clues, quieter ones. In the bathroom cabinet, I found a travel-size shampoo I didn't recognize. Citrus-scented. Not mine. Something a younger woman might use, but it wasn't proof. Not on its own. In his closet, I noticed 2 new shirts I hadn't seen before. Trendier than his usual choices. Again, not proof. Men buy shirts. Still, each little detail felt like another stone added to the weight in my chest. Around noon, I drove to the cafe printed on the receipt. It was in a part of town Daniel never mentioned visiting. When I walked in, the barista smiled politely. I ordered tea and sat near the window, pretending to scroll through my phone. Did he come here alone or with her, whoever she was? When the barista brought my drink, I asked casually, "Do a lot of businessmen come through here?" "Oh, sure," she said. "Lots of regulars from the insurance offices nearby." Insurance. Daniel's field. My heartbeat quickened. But again, it didn't mean anything. Not yet. Still, the seed of suspicion had roots now. I returned home and called my old friend, Linda. She had lived through a divorce 10 years earlier and had rebuilt her life with quiet strength. If anyone understood the fear curling inside me, it was her. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, stranger, everything okay?" I hesitated. "Can I ask you something, hypothetically?" She laughed softly. When someone says hypothetically, it's never hypothetical. I almost told her everything, the underwear, the lies, but something stopped me. Maybe I wasn't ready to speak the truth aloud, not until I had certainty. Have you ever felt that something was off with a partner before you knew for sure? Her tone shifted, softened. Yes, and that feeling doesn't come from nowhere. We talked for nearly half an hour. She didn't pry, didn't push. She simply listened, offering little pieces of practical advice. "Document things," she said at one point. "For yourself, not for court. It helps clear the fog." That word again, clarity. After the call, I grabbed the notebook and wrote down everything I'd noticed so far. The underwear, the receipt, the perfume, his sudden protectiveness over his phone, the late nights, the showers. Seeing it all on paper made my stomach twist. Could all of this still be innocent? Could I be imagining connections that weren't there? Or was I finally seeing the truth I had avoided for too long? When Daniel returned home that evening, I studied him with careful detachment. He talked cheerfully, almost overly so. He hugged me a little too tightly, kissed me a little too quickly. It felt like performance, not affection. While he showered after dinner, he left his phone on the dresser. That alone was unusual. Normally, he kept it glued to his pocket. For a moment, I stood beside it. One tap and I could unlock the screen. I knew his passcode, but I stepped back. "Not yet. I wasn't ready to cross that line, not without a clear purpose. This needed to be done right. Later that night, lying beside him in the dark, I thought about everything I stood to lose. My marriage, my home, my future as I had imagined it. But then I thought about something else. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to live with the truth. Fear and resolve battled inside me, but for the first time, resolve won. Tomorrow, I told myself, I would take the first real step, not dramatic, not confrontational, a quiet, official step toward the truth, because whatever Daniel was hiding, I was done living in the dark. The next morning, I woke with a kind of stillness inside me, not calm, not peace, but something firm. A decision had settled overnight like dust in a room no one had entered for years. I needed clarity, and clarity required facts. Daniel was still asleep when I slipped out of bed. I made coffee, showered, dressed, all with the quiet determination of someone who finally knows her next move. By 8:30, I was sitting in my car outside a small law office 3 towns over, where no one I knew would see me. I stared at the modest brick building, my hands resting on the steering wheel. Was I really doing this? Was I truly preparing for what might be the unraveling of my marriage? But what choice did I have? I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance before fear could drag me back. The receptionist greeted me kindly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "But I'd like a consultation about marital concerns." Within minutes, I was seated in a small office with a woman named Karen Miller, a divorce attorney with silver hair and tired, compassionate eyes. She reminded me of a school counselor, someone who had heard thousands of private sorrows and carried each one gently without judgment. "What's going on?" she asked. I paused, then spoke carefully. "I don't have proof, but I have reasons to believe my husband may be—" I searched for the right word. "Unfaithful." She nodded, not surprised. "Do you feel unsafe?" "No," I said quickly. "Just uncertain, and I need to know what my options are before I talk to him, if I talk to him." "That's wise." She folded her hands. "Let's start with some basics." For the next 45 minutes, she explained things I had never imagined I would need to know. Property division, retirement accounts, spousal support, the house, our savings, my financial rights given the length of our marriage. It wasn't dramatic or emotional or cinematic. It was practical. It was real. And it terrified me. "Even if you're not ready to file," Karen said gently, "you're doing the right thing by gathering information. Knowledge gives you control." Control, a word I hadn't associated with myself in months. She handed me a checklist of documents that could help paint a clearer picture. Bank statements, credit card records, tax returns. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal. Just things I already had access to as his wife. When I left her office, the autumn light felt too bright, the air too crisp. I walked to my car feeling both lighter and heavier, as if I had taken a step forward and backward at the same time. Was I really ready for what I might find? Back home, Daniel hadn't returned yet. I sat at the dining table and opened my notebook, writing down everything Karen had told me. I underlined one sentence 3 times: "Do not alert him." That part would be harder than anything else. When Daniel eventually walked through the door, he paused after setting down his keys. He studied me, not the casual look of a husband greeting his wife, but a sharper one, suspicious, calculating. "Everything okay?" he asked. Of course, I said, smiling gently. Why? You seem different. I shrugged, just tired. He nodded, but the frown between his eyebrows didn't disappear. Something in me tightened. He sensed it. He sensed me. He sensed the shift. And maybe that was the first confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. He was afraid of what I might be thinking. Why would an innocent man fear that? That evening, he was unusually attentive. He offered to help with dinner. He asked about my day. He even put his phone face up on the counter as if to demonstrate he had nothing to hide, except he kept glancing at it every 30 seconds. It looked rehearsed, performed, and I watched him with a quiet, unsettling calm. If he wanted to play innocent, I would play unaware. 2 days later, the first proof arrived unexpectedly. I was organizing our joint credit card statements at the dining table, preparing to scan them as Karen had suggested. Most of the charges were familiar: grocery stores, utilities, gas stations. Then I saw it. A hotel. A boutique hotel downtown. One we had never stayed at, not even once. The charge wasn't large, just a few hours worth, an afternoon rate. My heart stopped. I leaned in closer, reading every detail twice. The date was from the same afternoon Daniel had said he was in back-to-back meetings. I felt the room tilt slightly. The floor seemed farther away. The edges of the paper cut into my fingertips. There it was, not speculation, not suspicion, evidence. Maybe not enough for a courtroom, but enough for me. I sat there for a long time, staring at that line on the statement. My breath felt uneven, my throat tight, but my mind, strangely, was clear. What did this mean for my marriage? For my future? For the life I had built with him? For the woman I thought I was? I could feel grief rising in me like a tide, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I placed the statement gently into a folder. Proof. The first piece. There would be more, I felt certain. When Daniel came home that night, I watched him walk through the door with an ease that now felt sinister. He kissed my cheek, poured himself a drink, asked about dinner. All the normal, harmless, domestic gestures. But I knew, and he didn't know I knew. For the first time in months, I felt a strange sense of advantage. Not joy, not triumph, just insight. And insight, I realized, was power. Later, as he sat watching television, I stood in the hallway where he couldn't see me. I studied his silhouette, the relaxed posture, the casual tilt of his head, the image of a man who believed he had everything under control. But the truth sat in my folder, quiet, solid, unavoidable. This was my turning point. The moment I knew there was no going back to the woman I had been before. Whatever came next, I was done doubting myself. I was ready to move forward. After I found the hotel charge, something inside me settled. Not peace. No, peace was still far away. But a quiet certainty. Like the world had tilted and finally revealed the shape of something I'd been refusing to see. There was no unknowing it. No way to shove it back into the shadows where I'd kept my doubts. I now had my first piece of solid evidence, and evidence required action. The next morning, while Daniel showered, I slipped into the home office and opened our shared filing cabinet. I moved slowly, deliberately, mindful of every sound in the house. I retrieved bank statements, tax records, retirement documents, the items Karen had mentioned. It felt strangely procedural, almost like tending to household chores. But it wasn't chores, it was preparation. As I laid everything out on the kitchen table, I realized how much of our life existed on paper. Years of choices, investments, plans for a future that was suddenly collapsing inward. Was any of it real if he'd already replaced me somewhere else? I didn't have the courage to sit with that question yet. When Daniel came downstairs, freshly shaved, smelling of a shampoo I didn't recognize, citrus again, he paused when he saw me at the table. "What's all this?" "Oh, just organizing things," I said lightly, tapping the stack of papers. "It's been a while." He frowned. An almost imperceptible flicker crossed his eyes, a mix of discomfort and suspicion. He nodded, but something in his gaze stayed on me longer than usual. He knew something had shifted. Maybe he didn't know what, but he felt it. Later that day, I made my second quiet move. I called Karen's office and scheduled a follow-up appointment, this time with the intention of discussing next steps, official ones, the kind that came with signatures and consequences. But I wasn't ready to file. Not yet. I still needed more clarity, more evidence, even if it hurt to gather. I also needed time to think. If Daniel was cheating, who was she? A coworker? Someone younger? Someone who wore excess lace and drank iced lattes? Why did the image of her feel both unbearable and strangely distant? That evening after dinner, Daniel suddenly became agitated. Not openly, not dramatically, but restless. He moved through the house with an energy I didn't recognize. At one point, he stood in the doorway of the living room and said, too casually, "We should go away for a weekend, just the two of us." I looked up from my book. A weekend? Yeah, we haven't done that in a while. It sounded like an offer, but underneath, it felt like a tactic. The kind of move someone makes when they want to secure emotional ground that's beginning to slip, or distract from something brewing in the background. "Maybe," I said. "We'll see." He didn't like that answer. His jaw tightened. He sat down beside me, closer than usual, his hand landing on my knee. The gesture felt rehearsed, pressured. "Is something wrong?" he asked too softly. "No," I said. "Why?" "You've been off lately." "And you've been attentive lately." The words slipped out before I could soften them. His eyes sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I answered. "Just an observation." He studied me for another long second before leaning back, unreadable. The escalation came 2 days later. We were in the kitchen after dinner. I was washing dishes. He stood behind me drying a plate, though he never dried dishes. Not once in our marriage. "Are you checking up on me?" he asked suddenly. I froze. "What do you mean?" "You've been watching me, asking strange questions, going through things." My heart pounded, but my voice stayed level. "I don't know what you're talking about." He stepped closer. "Don't lie to me." The irony almost made me laugh, but I didn't. "Daniel," I said quietly, "why are you so worried about what I'm doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the dish towel and tossed it onto the counter with more force than necessary. "You're becoming paranoid," he said, "and it's making this house unbearable. Unbearable. As if my discomfort had poisoned his life. As if he wasn't the one who had carved this crack between us." "I'm not paranoid," I said. "I'm observant." His eyes flashed with something sharp. Anger or fear, I couldn't tell. "You're going to drive me away if you keep acting like this," he said. There it was, a threat disguised as a warning. Maybe he expected me to fall apart, to apologize, to plead. But I simply dried my hands and looked at him calmly. "You'll go where you already spend your time," I said, "with or without my acting." His face changed, subtly but undeniably, a crack in the mask. He stepped back, almost startled by my tone, then turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. That night, I lay awake, listening to the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. I realized something. I wasn't shocked by his reaction. I wasn't even devastated. I was tired, bone deep, tired. Manipulation had replaced intimacy. Blame had replaced honesty. Distance had replaced love. How long had that been true? Over the next few days, I gave myself what I desperately needed: space. I didn't follow him around. I didn't check his phone. I didn't analyze every word he said. I let myself breathe. I took long walks through our neighborhood, the leaves beginning to turn gold and red. I visited an art gallery downtown. I had lunch alone at a cafe by the river. It felt like rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. Daniel sensed the withdrawal. He became quieter, watching me from the corner of his eye like he was trying to decipher a code he'd never seen before. Maybe he thought I was calming down. Maybe he thought he'd regained control. But in reality, I had stepped out of the emotional storm long enough to see the landscape clearly. And what I saw made one thing very clear. This wasn't over, not even close. I was resting, not retreating, because the moment I stepped back into this, I would need strength. And I was getting it back. In the days that followed, Daniel behaved as though nothing had happened, or rather, as though nothing could happen unless he allowed it. He moved through the house with a renewed lightness, humming under his breath, whistling while he shaved, offering to take out the trash. His sudden bursts of domestic enthusiasm were so out of place they almost felt comedic. Almost. But beneath his cheerfulness, I sensed calculation, a subtle watchfulness, as if he were studying me, waiting to see whether I was still a threat or whether I had drifted back into the softness he depended on. What he didn't understand was that my silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The first attempt at reconciliation arrived on a Wednesday evening. I came home from a walk to find the dining table set with candles. Actual candles which Daniel had never once lit in all our years of marriage. He stood in the kitchen wearing an apron, stirring a pot of marinara like some sitcom husband preparing a romantic surprise. "There she is," he said brightly. "I thought we'd have a little date night, just us." I stared at the table for a moment. "What's the occasion?" He shrugged. "Does there need to be one?" But of course there did. Of course he wanted something. Peace, control, compliance. He pulled out a chair for me. "Sit. Let me take care of everything tonight." It would have been charming once, familiar, lovely even. Now it felt like a performance staged for an audience he desperately needed to convince. I sat anyway because refusing would have been more provocative than I intended. He poured me wine, the expensive kind he reserved for holidays. He talked about work, about the weather, about a neighbor's new roof, anything but us. But I watched him carefully. The way he kept glancing at me between sentences, the way his smile strained at the edges, the way his fingers drummed restlessly on the table whenever I didn't react the way he wanted. Was he trying to seduce me back into ignorance? To lull me with familiarity? Dinner tasted fine, but I barely remembered it. What stayed with me was the moment, just a split second, when he looked at me too hard, searching for reassurance, for softness, for the woman who used to bend her world around him. He didn't find her. The next morning, he tried again. A bouquet sat on the kitchen counter when I came down for coffee. Roses, red, dramatic, almost theatrical. A little card tucked inside read, "For my beautiful wife, I'm trying. D." I stared at the roses for a long moment. Trying. Trying to do what? Erase evidence? Rewrite memory? Keep me steady while he balanced two lives? I placed the bouquet in water, not out of sentiment, but because letting them wilt felt like a declaration I wasn't ready to make. When Daniel came downstairs and saw them displayed neatly on the counter, his shoulders loosened just a little. He thought it meant something, but it only meant I wasn't going to be careless. Not anymore. Over the next few days, he shifted strategies. Less romance, more normalcy. He made jokes during dinner. He commented on the dog's new obsession with chasing squirrels. He offered to go grocery shopping with me, something he hadn't done in years. Every gesture felt like a plea disguised as affection. Was he afraid I had real evidence? Or did he simply need to keep me emotionally still while he figured out what I knew? Either way, I didn't give him anything. Yes, I responded to him politely. Yes, I kept the conversation light. Yes, I acted as though my days were the same as always. But inside, something in me remained cool and distant, as if my emotions had slid behind a glass pane. I could see them, but I wasn't controlled by them. Not anymore. And yet, even determination has limits. One evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room with the lights off. The quiet of the house felt too heavy, too absolute. My thoughts circled the same fears I had written in my notebook weeks earlier. What if I miscalculated? What if I was heading toward a future lonelier than the present? What if I wasn't strong enough for what came next? That's when I realized something important. I needed support, not validation, not someone to confirm my suspicions, but someone who would stand beside me when I began walking into the next heavier chapter. Linda was the first person I thought of. I called her the next morning. "Can we meet?" I asked. "I think I'm ready to talk." We met at a cafe near the water, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and soft jazz playing in the background. She hugged me the moment she saw me, tight, warm, grounding. We sat down with our coffees, and I finally told her everything. The underwear, the perfume, the hotel charge, the threats disguised as concern. The candles and roses meant to pacify, not love. She listened without interrupting, her expression a mixture of sadness and fierce protectiveness. When I was finished, she reached across the table and clasped my hand. "This isn't paranoia," she said. "This is betrayal, and you're handling it with more strength than you realize." Strength. I didn't feel strong. But maybe strength wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was the decision to keep going despite it. Linda didn't tell me what to do. She didn't push me toward divorce or reconciliation. She simply offered presence, solid, dependable, without agenda. Support, exactly what I needed. When I returned home, I felt steadier, calmer. The kind of calm that comes from knowing you are not navigating the darkness alone. Daniel noticed it immediately. He watched me with narrow eyes like a man trying to measure something he couldn't see. He didn't try to romance me that night. He didn't make jokes. He didn't offer help. He simply observed, quietly, carefully. He had retreated just enough to study my every move, and I could feel it. A shift in the dynamic. His seduction phase was over. His patience was thinning. His fear was growing. And mine had turned into resolve. What came next would push both of us further than we'd ever been pushed. And I was ready. Daniel waited 2 more days before he made his next move. It was a Sunday morning. Quiet, gray, the kind of morning where the house feels like it's still asleep. I was in the sunroom reading, the dog curled at my feet. The soft ticking of the wall clock blended with the faint rustling of tree branches outside. Daniel stepped into the doorway, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, an unusual posture for him. He was normally upright, controlled, performative. "Can we talk?" he asked. I closed the book slowly. "About what?" He exhaled through his nose, a rush of air that sounded rehearsed. "About us." There it was, the big, vague, sweeping conversation he had been waiting to deploy. I nodded and gestured to the chair across from me. He didn't sit. Instead, he paced once, twice, then turned to me with an expression that hovered between concern and accusation. "I feel like we're drifting," he said, "and I don't know why. You've been distant." Distant. As though he hadn't been the one pulling away for months. As though my distance wasn't a response to his secrets, but the cause of them. "I've just been thinking," I said calmly. "Thinking about what?" He wanted specifics, anchors, something he could grab and twist. I shrugged. Life, marriage, the usual things. He moved a step closer. "If something's wrong, you need to tell me. Keeping things from me is unfair." Unfair. The word almost made me laugh, but I kept my expression neutral, hands woven in my lap, my breathing steady. "Daniel," I said, "I'm reflecting on things, that's all." He stared at me, his jaw tightening, then his tone sharpened. "Are you checking my phone?" "No." "Are you going through my things?" "No." "Are you talking to anyone about me?" I paused, briefly, and that pause was enough. His eyes narrowed. "Who?" "It doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't," he snapped. The temperature in the room shifted. Subtle but unmistakable. This wasn't concern. This was interrogation, a boundary test, a pressure tactic. He stepped even closer. "If someone is filling your head with ideas—" "No one is filling my head with anything," I said firmly. "I can think for myself." That sentence landed like a slap. He blinked, taken aback. For a moment, he looked almost wounded, but it wasn't genuine hurt. It was the performance of a man whose script was no longer working. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, voice turning low. "Why are you trying to push me away? I'm trying here. I'm trying more than you realize. Trying, always trying. Trying to manipulate. Trying to regain control. Trying to make me question myself." "Daniel," I said softly, "what exactly are you afraid I'm doing?" He flinched, a tiny movement barely visible but unmistakable. Fear. Real fear. At last, something honest from him. A beat passed, then another, and then his expression hardened. "You're being dramatic," he said, "and paranoid. You've been different ever since." He stopped abruptly, realizing he had almost revealed a timeline he shouldn't have. "Ever since what?" I asked quietly. He exhaled sharply, turning away. "Forget it." But I didn't forget it. Not for a second. He paced again, rubbing his neck. "Look, let's just call a truce, okay? No more tension, no more whatever this is. Let's get back to normal." Normal, the most dangerous word in a crumbling marriage. Normal meant silence. Normal meant blindness. Normal meant accepting crumbs and calling it stability. "I don't think I can go back to normal," I said. He spun toward me. "Why not?" "Because I knew. Because I wasn't the woman I used to be. Because his lies had forced me awake." But I didn't say any of that. I simply looked him in the eye and told the simplest, truest version. Because things have changed. His nostrils flared. "Because you changed. He cut himself off, shaking his head. "You're ruining this." "Am I?" I asked softly, "or did something else ruin it first?" His face darkened. There it was, the mask slipping. He stepped closer again, voice dropping. "You're going to destroy everything we built if you keep this up. That was not a plea. It was a threat. I felt a sharp pulse of fear, but beneath it, determination. Almost relief. At least now he'd stopped pretending. I straightened my back. "Daniel, I'm not destroying anything. I'm just paying attention." He stared at me for several seconds, chest rising and falling. His right hand curled into a fist, then loosened. His eyes darted toward the window, toward the hallway, toward me again, like he was searching for a path through a room that had suddenly become too small. Finally, he muttered, "I can't talk to you when you're like this," and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just left, quietly, but with the energy of a man retreating in anger. When his footsteps faded down the hallway, the silence of the house pressed in around me. For a moment, I sat completely still, my pulse thudding in my ears. Fear prickled at the edges of my ribs. Not fear of him physically, but fear of what came next. Fear of the escalation. Fear of the inevitable confrontation. But then something unexpected happened. My fear steadied, coalesced, transformed. It became focus. He had shown his hand. The pressure, the manipulation, the barely veiled threat. He didn't know what I knew. He didn't know what proof I had. He didn't know what my next step would be. But he knew I wasn't soft anymore. And that terrified him. For the rest of the day, I moved through the house quietly, letting the conversation replay in my mind. Each replay sharpened my resolve. By evening, one truth had crystallized. I wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. And the next step, whatever it would be, was coming soon. I could feel it. In the days that followed our confrontation in the sunroom, something in the air of the house changed. It felt heavier, as if every room had absorbed the tension and stored it in its walls. Daniel moved around me quietly, cautiously, but not with gentleness, with calculation. He watched me like a man trying to assess the stability of a bridge he'd been walking across for years without realizing it was cracking beneath him. But I wasn't thinking about the cracks anymore. I was thinking about the truth beneath them. And I knew I was close. I spent the next 3 days gathering everything I needed, one careful, deliberate step at a time. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't breaking into anything. I wasn't doing anything a spouse doesn't already have legitimate access to. But I was paying attention. I pulled older credit card statements from the file box stored in the hallway closet. I studied his calendar, not hidden, just sitting there on his desk. I connected dates and times, late nights, client dinners, team meetings, odd charges, unfamiliar restaurants, ride shares at strange hours, a boutique clothing store receipt for something that definitely wasn't his style. Piece by piece, the pattern formed. The pattern he never thought I'd piece together. The final confirmation came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Daniel was at work. The house was still. I was sitting at his desk in the office sorting through last year's tax folders, a completely ordinary task on the surface. Then I found it. A printed hotel reservation. Not the charge I'd seen earlier, but an actual emailed confirmation he must have printed for some reason. Maybe he needed it for reimbursement. Maybe he simply forgot to shred it. There were 2 names on the reservation. His and hers. Emily S. A full name, a timestamp, a room number, a physical address, a date from only a few weeks earlier. I stared at the paper for a long time. My throat tightened. My hand shook once, just once, before I forced it steady. That was it, the last missing piece. Undeniable, concrete, real. I placed it gently into the folder with the other proof. My hands felt cold, my heartbeat slow but heavy. Had I expected to feel relief? Had I expected to feel rage or devastation? What I felt instead was clarity, sharp, clean, undeniable. The truth was no longer something I feared. It was something I could finally see in full. And now it was time. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. I didn't set the stage with emotion or anger. I didn't need to catch him off guard. He'd been living off guard for weeks without realizing it. I simply chose the moment that felt right. That evening, after dinner, when he was sitting in the living room watching television, pretending everything was ordinary, I walked in and stood in front of him. "Daniel," I said, "turn the TV off." He did, instantly. Something in my voice must have reached him. He looked up at me, guarded. "What is it?" I sat down in the armchair across from him and placed the folder on my lap. The same folder I'd been building piece by piece, quietly, steadily. He noticed it immediately. His eyes flicked to it, then back to me. A small muscle twitched in his jaw. "What's that?" he asked. "Information," I said. "About us." He swallowed. "About us or about me?" "Both." I opened the folder. His entire body tensed, like a wire pulled too tight. "Before I say anything," I began, "I want you to understand something. I'm not guessing. I'm not imagining. I'm not being paranoid." He didn't speak. He didn't blink. I laid the hotel receipt on the coffee table between us. "This," I said, "was the first thing." He stared at it, expression blank, too blank. Then I placed the printed reservation beside it. "And this," I continued, "was the last." His eyes darted over the page, then back to me, then away. His throat bobbed. His fingers twitched on his knees. "I don't," he began, then stopped. This isn't what it looks like." "It looks like you booked a hotel room with another woman," I said evenly. "And it looks exactly like that because that's what it is." He opened his mouth again, then closed it. He reached for the paper, then pulled his hand back as if touching it might burn him. "Where did you get this?" he asked finally, his voice thin. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Everything I have is legitimate. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was hacked. Nothing was invaded. You left a trail. I followed it." He rubbed his temple. "You've been spying on me." "No," I said calmly. "I've been listening." He stood abruptly, pacing, running his hands through his hair. "You have no idea what's going on, okay? You're twisting things. You're blowing things up in your head." I didn't move. "Tell me what happened then. Explain it." He stopped. His mouth opened. No words came. He tried again. It's complicated." A bitter smile tugged at my lips. "It always is." He turned away from me, shoulders hunched. "I didn't want you to find out like this. That implies you wanted me to find out at all." He pressed his palms against his eyes. "I made mistakes. Mistakes don't have names in hotel reservations," I said. He spun toward me, panic sharp in his voice. "You're twisting everything. You're trying to trap me." "Trap him?" I almost laughed. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I don't need to trap you. You trapped yourself." He froze. And that was the moment, the exact moment, when everything in his expression broke. Whatever story he'd planned to spin, whatever excuse he'd prepared, whatever manipulation he'd hoped to use, none of it worked. He sank onto the couch, hands limp, eyes unfocused. A man who finally saw the full shape of his own collapse. For a long time, neither of us spoke. He stared at the evidence. I stared at the man who had once been my partner. Two strangers sitting in a room filled with truths we could no longer avoid. Finally, I said, "We're done pretending." And he didn't argue, because he couldn't. We sat in silence for several minutes after I said the words. He didn't try to deny anything else. He didn't beg or apologize. He simply stared at the papers spread out between us like they were the remains of something he never expected to lose. Maybe he never imagined I would get this far. Maybe he never believed I had the strength or the clarity or the will, but I did. And now the truth sat between us, undeniable and cold. I rose from the chair, the folder still in my hand. "We're going to handle this like adults," I said. "You'll have time to process, but the next steps are already in motion." He blinked. "Next steps?" "I've spoken to a lawyer." His face went pale. The kind of pale that reveals a truth tears never could. Shock, fear, a realization that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. You already started." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Yes." My voice was calm, firm. "I know my rights, I know what's fair, and I know what I want." He swallowed hard. "Can't we talk about this first?" "We just did," I said. "For months I've been talking, you just haven't heard me." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You're overreacting. You're throwing away our whole life." "You threw it away," I said, "one lie at a time." His breath hitched at that. And for a moment, a very brief one, I saw something like remorse in him. But it flickered out as fast as it appeared, replaced by frustration, by entitlement, by a man who wasn't used to being confronted. "You can't take everything," he said quietly. "I won't let you." "I'm not taking everything. I'm taking what's mine." He stared at me, chest rising and falling as though he'd just run a mile. "What do you want?" "Half," I said, "of everything." His face twisted. "The house, the accounts, all of it?" "You didn't build this life alone," I said, "and you won't walk away with the whole thing." He looked down, defeated, elbows resting on his knees. "This is going to ruin me." "You did that," I said, "not me." That night, Daniel slept in the guest room without me telling him to. I heard him pacing for hours, the boards creaking as he moved back and forth. I lay awake in the master bedroom, staring at the ceiling, the faint sound of his footsteps like distant thunder. Was this really happening? Was this the end of a 26-year marriage? Was this what betrayal sounded like? No, this was what rebuilding sounded like, and I felt strangely calm, almost weightless. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for the next lie. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I wasn't fending off charm or excuses or doubt. I was standing on solid ground again. The next morning, I emailed Karen, my attorney. "I'm ready to move forward." She wrote back in minutes and asked me to come in that afternoon. I drove to her office with the folder in my bag, the evidence that had become both my burden and my shield. She reviewed everything quietly, nodding, making notes. "This is enough," she said. "More than enough." My throat tightened, but I nodded. "Good." She outlined the plan: petition for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, request for equitable division of marital assets, request for my share of retirement and savings, the house likely leaning in my favor, given my age and financial stability needs. It was all so practical, so procedural, so real. "This will move quickly," she said gently. "He doesn't have much room to fight." A strange relief washed through me. Not joy. I wasn't naive enough for that. But relief. It was happening, and I wasn't afraid. When I returned home, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table staring at his hands. "You went to her, didn't you?" he asked. "Yes." His voice cracked. "So that's it. You're divorcing me." I'm ending something that ended a long time ago, I said. He stood abruptly, pacing again. I messed up, okay? I made a mistake. A mistake, I said quietly, is forgetting an anniversary or saying something cruel during an argument. A mistake isn't maintaining an affair. His face twisted. She didn't mean anything. Then why did you risk everything for her? He didn't answer. I stepped past him and began preparing a cup of tea. My hands were steady, my breathing even. He watched me bewildered. How are you so calm? Because I've already lived through the hardest part, I said. The doubt, the confusion, the self-blame. That's over now. He sank into a chair. I can't lose everything. You won't, I said softly, but you will lose me. He put his head in his hands. I didn't think you had the strength to do this. I know, I said. That was your mistake. That evening I packed a small bag. Not to leave the house, but because I needed a symbolic gesture. A way to tell myself that I was stepping into a new life even while standing in the same walls. Daniel watched me from the doorway, silent, emotionally disassembled. When I zipped the bag shut, I turned to him. I'm not angry, I said. I'm done. Something in his face collapsed. Not dramatically, not with sobbing or shouting, but quietly. A man who realized his story wasn't ending the way he believed it would. You're going to destroy me, he whispered. No, I said. You destroyed us. I'm just refusing to pretend anymore. He flinched, and for a second I saw the full consequence of his choices settle into him like a final stone. There was no more performance left, no more deflection, no more leverage. He had lost, completely. And he knew it. That night I slept deeply for the first time in months. Not because everything was resolved, but because everything was finally moving, finally honest, finally mine to shape. Tomorrow the legal process would begin. Tomorrow the paperwork would start. Tomorrow I would start building a future alone. But tonight I allowed myself to breathe. Daniel was defeated. The truth had won. And for the first time in a long time, so had I. In the week that followed, the house felt different. Not empty, not hostile, just quieter. As if the air itself had exhaled after months of being held tight. Daniel stayed in the guest room every night, and our interaction shrank to the bare minimum. A few sentences about mail or bills, a question about dinner, the clatter of utensils in separate sinks. But beneath the mundane surface, everything was shifting. My future wasn't tied to his decisions anymore. My life wasn't waiting on his honesty. I woke earlier. I breathed deeper. I moved differently through the rooms, as though rediscovering space that had always belonged to me. And day by day, the heaviness lifted. Daniel, however, began to unravel. At first, he tried to maintain a front, calm, composed, resigned. But the cracks surfaced quickly. I heard him on the phone late at night, his voice strained, angry, whispering sharply before slamming it down. Once, as I walked past the guest room, I heard him mutter, "I'm losing everything," to no one. He left dishes half-washed in the sink, something he never used to do. He misplaced his keys twice. He forgot to take out the trash on his designated day, which, in 26 years, had never once slipped his mind. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet unraveling of a man who realized the consequences had finally reached him. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel satisfaction. What I felt was distance, wide, calm, and clean. 2 weeks after I filed the petition, he received the official papers. He came into the kitchen holding the envelope, face pale. "So this is real," he said. "It's been real," I answered gently. He looked at me for a long moment, a question flickering in his eyes. Maybe, "Why didn't you fight for us?" Or "When did I lose you?" But he didn't ask. Maybe he already knew. He left the room quietly. I stood at the counter stirring sugar into my tea, feeling no triumph, only the confirmation of what was already true. We were done. I began the slow process of rebuilding my routines, one fragile, deliberate step at a time. I joined a small morning walking group in the neighborhood, not to make friends necessarily, but to remind myself that life didn't stop at the boundary of our house. The first morning I showed up, a woman named Claire smiled and said, "We've seen you walking alone for ages. Glad you joined us." I nodded, a little embarrassed, a little grateful. As we walked, the soft hum of conversation around me felt soothing, like stepping into a warm bath after months of cold air. It wasn't connection yet, but it was proximity, and proximity was a start. I also began cooking differently, smaller portions, fresh vegetables, simpler meals that were mine alone. Cooking for one wasn't sad the way people often described. It was efficient, gentle, self-directed. Some nights I tried new recipes. Others, I simply reheated leftovers and watched the sun set through the kitchen window. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for a car in the driveway, or a story about a workday or an explanation for a late return. My evenings were my own. Meanwhile, Daniel's life grew more tangled. One afternoon, I overheard him in the hallway arguing on the phone. His voice rose, not shouting, but tight, desperate. "I can't keep doing this. No, you don't understand. She's filing, Emily." "Yes, she filed." I froze. So her name was Emily, the same name on the reservation. The rest of the conversation was muffled, but the tone told me everything. His complicated affair wasn't a romantic escape. It was messy, unstable, fractured by the very pressure he had created. Later that day, he left the house abruptly, slamming the door behind him. When he returned hours later, his eyes were puffy and red, as if he'd been crying. He walked past me without a word. I said nothing. This was not my emotional labor to carry anymore. Little by little, I reclaimed parts of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. I started tending the backyard again, the rose bushes along the fence, the small herb patch near the patio. Gardening had once been a comfort to me, but over the years I'd let it slip away, too drained to nurture anything. Now I found myself kneeling in the dirt, trimming wilted petals, planting new seedlings, letting the earthy scent calm the static in my mind. There was something grounding in the rhythm of it, something healing, something growing. Maybe that something was me. My social world widened too, in small but steady increments. Linda invited me to join her and two of her friends for lunch at a small bistro downtown. I almost declined, the uncertainty of stepping into a group making my stomach knot. But I went. The conversation drifted easily. Books, movies, overpriced groceries, the absurdity of trying to stay young in a country obsessed with youth. I laughed, really laughed, and it felt like a part of my chest had loosened that I didn't know was tight. When I drove home afterward, I realized I hadn't thought about Daniel once. Not once. That felt like the real turning point. As for Daniel and Emily, their unraveling became impossible to ignore. He started leaving early and coming home late, the opposite of what had drawn my suspicions months earlier. Once he came home with a bruise forming on his cheekbone. He brushed past me when I noticed, muttering, "It's nothing," which told me everything. Their relationship wasn't surviving the transition from secret to reality. Most affairs don't. His late-night phone calls became more frantic. I heard phrases like, "I can't pay for both places." "You promised this would be simple." "I'm losing my house." I didn't feel pity, but I didn't feel pleasure either. It was simply the logical end of decisions he had made without me. The divorce process moved smoothly. Karen was thorough, organized, steady. Daniel's attorney tried to negotiate for a smaller share of the house's value, but the facts were the facts, and given my age, our long marriage, and his misconduct, the court leaned in my favor. When the settlement was finalized, I kept the house. The moment I signed the last document, my hand didn't tremble, not even a little. Daniel left the property 2 weeks later. He moved into a small apartment across town. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't apologize. He simply handed over his keys on the front porch and walked away. I watched him go without sadness, only closure. In the days that followed, the house felt different again, not empty but open, airy, light. I reorganized the furniture, cleaned every drawer, repainted the sunroom walls a soft sage green. For the first time in decades, the house reflected me, my taste, my calm, my future. I wasn't lonely, I wasn't lost, I wasn't broken. I was starting over, and I was ready. Now, when I wake in this quiet house, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, I feel something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the fragile kind that can be broken by a lie, but the sturdy kind you earn by facing the truth head on. So I'll ask you this. What would you have done in my place? Would you have looked away or looked closer? If my story spoke to you, leave a comment. Follow along. Join this small circle of women learning to trust themselves again. There are more stories, many more waiting on my channel.